Hello everyone and welcome back to FUSION22. If you're just joining us, then welcome to the Illuminate Theatre. If you are online, wherever you are in the world, welcome. It's wonderful to have you with us. If you are online, you can join in the chat. Please tell us where you're watching from and join in the Q&A as well. You can send in your question to our panel at any time if you are online. And do also check out our virtual exhibitor booths as well. Now, we've never been closer to fusion energy, yet there are still technical challenges ahead, plenty of technical challenges. And here to explore the areas that we need to progress are our panelists. Chairing the panel is Sachin Desai, General Counsel at Helion Energy. Ian Chapman is Chief Executive Officer at UK Atomic Energy Authority, and Dennis Whyte is Director of Plasma Science at the Fusion Centre at MIT. Take it away, Sachin.
Thank you very, very much. I'd like to say thank you to all of you for coming and for the UKAEA and all the fine folks with this organization that have helped set up this conference. It's been an excellent experience so far. I think we're really excited to get some really good questions on this complex topic. I think we'll just do about 4 questions to overview and then jump into the audience. But maybe we can start actually, if you're going to talk about technology, maybe you can overview really quickly the organizations that you work with and what they're pursuing.
Me go first?
Yeah.
Right. Hello, everybody. So UKAEA is the UK's national fusion lab, for those of you that don't know us. So we're a public venture, so part of the government. We operate JET, which is the largest fusion tokamak in the world today, the only one capable of doing deuterium and tritium ahead of ITER. We also operate the UK's own spherical tokamak, so compact machine called Mast Upgrade, which is exploring really clever innovative ways of getting the heat out of fusion devices, which is one of the big challenges that I'm sure we'll talk about. On top of that, the lab has now diversified to tackle lots and lots of the fusion technology challenges. So how we maintain the device, probably using very sophisticated large robotics. The materials that we build the device from, both the structural materials and the first wall materials, and how we qualify those materials. Manufacturing solutions, so how we use those materials on large scale and how we might qualify the welds and the brazes of full components that go into power plants. Where we get our fuel from, how we store our tritium, how we breed our tritium, how we process our tritium, how we account for it. So all of those different things, and I think that's the beauty of the organisation, is that we do that full breadth of technical capability. We also do the full life cycle. So we go from early stage research and innovation into design, into operations, operating the largest fusion device today, and now beginning to think about a decommissioning program as well. So full life cycle. UKAEA, by hook or by crook, is pretty much the largest fusion organisation in the world today. I would see as success that we are not the largest fusion organisation in the world. I absolutely think that should be our partners, right? We're a research organisation. If fusion's going to become reality, it's not going to be taken there by research organisations. Right. So success for me is that we become a player subservient to very large industry players.
Excellent.
Yeah, good segue. So I'm the director of the Plasma Science and Fusion Center. We're obviously at a university, MIT, but it's an unusual organization in the sense it's probably the largest university-based fusion research program. So obviously we have a key educational component to it, being at a university, but it's an interdisciplinary lab that actually tackles primarily through education, PhD students and so forth, the topics that Ian just mentioned, which has to do with the totality of fusion. And the good segue is things becoming larger than you are. So we are also the birthplace of Commonwealth Fusion Systems, which you've heard about several times today. And in fact, in collaboration with them, after they spun out of our laboratory, we co-developed a new magnet technology that is now leading to the construction of a device called Spark, which is just outside of Boston, by Commonwealth Fusion Systems to demonstrate net energy gain using the tokamak approach. But at MIT, we're actually trying to tackle from a fundamental point of view all the necessary things which are in the life cycle of materials, fuel extraction, heat extraction that will in fact make fusion economic. We're going to come back to that topic. And a fun note on this is about things becoming larger than you. So we're a rather large organization inside of MIT, about 300 people. But a few months ago, the company went past us in size and is now around 400 people. And so that's also exciting to see the possible commercialization of fusion coming down the road.
Excellent, excellent point. I'll just really add quickly about the company I work with. Helion Energy is pioneering a slightly different approach to fusion than you may have heard about, but it's an excellent example of the diversity in the field. Instead of trying to confine a single ring of plasma, we form 2 different plasmoids and accelerate them to the center, compress the final product to fusion conditions, and then directly extract the energy to a usable form of electricity. Real quick, I'll just note that our goal fuel cycle is deuterium helium-3 fusion, although the process can work with any fusion fuel. We have built 6 working prototypes, including our last prototype called Trenta, which is named after a Starbucks coffee, has hit 100 million degrees plasma temperature, which is essentially a demonstration of commercially relevant fusion conditions with our approach. And as a result of that, we raised some funds and are pursuing the construction of our 7th generation prototype, which is the goal of which is to demonstrate net electricity from fusion by the middle of the decade, 2024. And that means producing not just net energy, but then electricity that can go into homes and businesses. Although that device won't power homes, it's going to demonstrate that process. So we got a great diversity of different approaches here, and I look forward to a lot of good questions. First thing we'll jump in. Let's start by talking about the technical achievements we've made so far. Particularly, what solution to challenges have come along that now make it possible for us to see fusion on the grid in a decade or so?
Well, I'd start actually with the achievement of the JET tokamak here in the United Kingdom. So in the end, fusion is an energy production device, and the fact that there was a sustained level of controlled fusion reactions for a sufficient period of time that they broke the record for energy production is an extremely exciting aspect of this. But it's actually more than just producing it. It's the fact that we actually have the tools now in place that we're able to predict the ability to get there. It wasn't an easy track all the way to get there, as Ian can tell you. But this was done through hard work. I mean, fusion, you'll see a lot of excitement about fusion, but making fusion conditions is still hard. And so this means is that the more that we can build the predictive capabilities actually of telling us about where we're going to achieve the right conditions is absolutely necessary, because this has to be more than, in the end, just a scientific demonstration. It has to be an economic demonstration, and the more predictive tools that you have, the better you're going to be able to actually steer the science in some way into the place where you're going to get the conditions which actually meet those goals. So I see the coupling actually, and the more rapid coupling of experimental capabilities into leading edge simulations, which themselves take advantage of high performance computing, which is a new technical innovation that we have in front of us, is really accelerating the pace of development and innovation.
Right.
Can I, before I answer your question, I'm going to first of all take exception to your question. Because you talked about putting fusion on the grid in 10 years. I struggle to subscribe to that. I mean, I'm hugely enthusiastic about fusion and the potential of it, but I struggle to see how we get to that point. I mean, we've talked a few times today about when will fusion happen, right? And to me, there are 3 stages of fusion happening. There's first of all reaching a gain. Absolutely sure that I can get on board with reaching a gain inside 10 years, where you get more thermal power out than thermal power put in. Then there's producing net electricity, where you get more electricity out than electricity in. And then there's doing that on a commercial scale that somebody will buy. And I see those as tiers. And if you're talking about the last one of them, I think it's really almost impossible that we could see that in 10 years. If you're talking about the first one of them, I can subscribe to that.
Yeah. And close to 2, I think.
Maybe.
I think
you could
so.
push 2,
yeah.
but I think 3 is it's a bridge too far on that time scale. Right, now let me answer your question.
Oh, good. This is actually great. Now I'm going to have some refereeing.
Yeah. Good. So you were very kind about us. Let me be kind about you, Dennis. About, I don't know, was it 3 or 4 years ago when you spun out CFS?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You were very courteous, and the day before the press release came out, you gave me a call. I remember it rightly because I was sat in government. For those of you that know government buildings, they're not very salubrious. And you gave me a call and said, we're spinning out this company, and this is what we're going to try and achieve. And you said, we're aiming to build a full-bore 21 Tesla HTS coil on the scale of meters and tons. And I was nice to you, and I said, well, good luck, Dennis, good luck. But, you know, personally, I thought, you're
Bonkers.
good luck, you know, genuinely good luck. I just didn't think you'd achieve it. Because at the time, you know, what Dennis was talking about, you know, was this big, maybe the size of your finger, and not very reliable, and there was no supply chain, and nobody had demonstrated getting anywhere close to that. And to do that in the matter of, well, you could count it in months, right, was hugely ambitious. And they've done it. And, you know, full congratulations to the team. And it's a major advance in fusion. I mean, the clue is in the name. There's magnetic fusion. Magnets are a good thing for fusion. Produces more fusion power. We know that. We've known it for decades. We just haven't been able to access it. And the fact that MIT and the spin-out CFS have now achieved that is a huge breakthrough in the field. And it really does open up pathways that just were just a pipe dream a few years ago. So, and that's not the only one. There's lots of transformations like that which are really causing genuine excitement in the field.
Yeah, to hit on a couple other transformations. They've come up in other panels, but for some of the pulsed power approaches, you've seen innovations in power electronics across the board, and includes semiconductors, switches, fiber optics. There's been also, I think, HTS magnets are a great example of enabling technologies across the board, things that have come across that have found their start in other industries that have now found application to enhance fusion and bring a lot of fusion concepts that may have been 2 decades away to possibly a decade away. Now, this is a great, but you're leading into something else, right? We've talked about technical progress, and we've seen amazing technical progress in the research and development. But assuming we hit the mid-decade R&D milestones on net gain, you know, what challenges do we have to be thinking about in order to get fusion on the grid as soon as possible?
So it actually goes to the to the advent of the new magnet technology. This is a great example. It's almost it's the dog chasing the bus, right? And what happens when you catch the bus? And what to put this numerically a little bit more is that this was a doubling of the magnetic field, which was possible. And by the rules of plasma science, this means that the amount of at fixed science or fixed physics, the amount of fusion power per unit volume will increase by a factor of 16. It's like, wow, that's great, but that's the bus. Because when you actually can make that much more power, or what you do is you make a large amount of power in a smaller object, this means you must come up with ways to efficiently extract that energy. That is within the limits, in fact, of the technological limits and the thermal limits of all the material, not just the materials, but actually the full components which are around it. And if you don't do this, then in fact you're leaving economic gain on the table. And in fact, I would put it at a higher level, like when you don't optimize the amount of fusion power you can make out, this doesn't optimize the amount of fusion energy you make, and this means that we're further away from using fusion as a reliable energy source. And this is an enormous integrated technical problem that is, you know, we don't have the solutions to this, and the simple reason being that, you know, we kind of thought fusion was 30, 40 years away, you know, and what happens if it actually is demonstrated in a science sense in 3 or 4 years? I think we would hang our heads in shame if we're not, in fact, running as fast as we can actually towards those kinds of technological solutions which would enable us to maximize fusion's effectiveness.
Yeah, can I pick up on the integration, because I think that's fundamental. You know, fusion is not just have a hot fuel that's hot in the sun and deal with the heat exhaust. It's also the most intense neutron source and how you deal with those neutrons and how you make enough of your own fuel, how you're going to breed the tritium, where's your supply chain of lithium-6, how you're going to maintain it, how you're going to keep the availability up, because if you don't do any of that, then the cost to the consumer is terrible. And it's the integration of all of those things that, in my view, has been the change in the field in the last 10 years or so. I mean, when I came to the field like 2 decades ago, it was really a plasma physics field. It was dominated by plasma physics, probably still is, to be honest. But you know, if the field still looked like the one that I joined, I'd have left it, because it wouldn't be, you know, really on an energy mission. It would have been a science field. And the fact that the programs have now actually started to think about and tackle the integration challenge of how you solve all of those things at once and actually come up with power plant designs is the thing which gives me faith and gives me confidence. And a shout out to the Eurofusion team, who were pretty much the pioneers in this. They were the first people to actually say, right, let's try and design a power plant, the whole thing, the whole shebang, and look at all of the integration and all of the challenges together. And And maybe that plant might change in its scope, and some of the breakthroughs like HTS might cause it to change plan. But it was the first attempt at a real integrated design, and only by doing that do you actually think, oh, there's the problem. Oh, that's the problem I didn't think. Oh, there's another problem. You've actually got to think about the whole integration, how it works together in a system.
Yeah,
and the fact that the community is there now gives me real hope.
That was actually one of the things I saw as a theme, is this ecosystem, and talking about there's suppliers, other companies, other people that never thought about entering fusion that are now jumping into the space to help solve those integration problems. I think I don't know about the staffing. Congratulations on hitting 300. That's an amazing milestone for staff. I'd suspect that, at least with Helion, a lot of the people that we hire now, there are lots of, plasma physics and PhDs, but lots of engineers there that solve thermal management issues, other types of integration issues, technical staff, the people that need to round out our actual development of an integrated system. So integration is a key point. I'll also just tackle another point that I heard in a prior panel, and just introduce it here, which is scale. Because if we really want to, let's say the 1 decade challenge, right, for the decadal vision the US calls it, about getting to a fusion device on the grid in a decade. We also need to think about how we're going to build 2 to 10 to 100. And if we have 3 terawatts of fossil fuel generation that we need to convert, and fusion might be the only technology that has the kind of energy density and mass manufacturability to solve that conversion issue, we need to start thinking now for scale. And I know that came up in a prior panel. It's a really important issue.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely critical. And what does scalability mean? Well, there's a science aspect to scalability, but we've known about this since we discovered how stars work, because fusion has a scalability because of the access to the fundamental fuel, that we know that's not going to be the limitation. The limitation is going to be how fast can you build these integrated devices that actually provide reliable energy. How fast can you build them? Right. And in the end, that's going to be hard itself, almost no matter what one that you take, because of these aspects. So this is why I'll go back to how much power do you make? It's like, so if you can make double the power, then I make half the devices. That's going to be an enormous win as you go forward with these. And so this is why this is such a critical time as well too, because the levers that we're pulling right now, in some sense, about the integrated designs and the gains that we might perceive will actually have enormous consequences down the road. And we've seen this in other technologies, like in fission, for example, they made choices which actually limited them in the end about the scalability around on those things. And I have to say, as somebody who comes from a university environment, coupling with a private company and the investors that they had was groundbreaking, because it made us think about the scalability of the manufacturing process of this cutting edge technology, which usually you don't think of those things too.
This is perfect, because one last question before we get to the audience questions is, how do we solve? We have to solve these challenges soon, because we have a timeline. This is one of the few cases where you have an energy technology or a technology deploying that has some sort of existential, unrelated but related timeline to it. How do the public and private sectors look at this challenge differently, and what are the different levers that they can pull?
Yeah, can I answer your previous question and then I'll come to that one?
Yeah, sure.
On imperative, and scale, I completely agree with what Dennis said, but there is a limiting factor there, in that if you look at, I don't know, the advent of fission or the advent of gas overtaking coal, they were growing, roughly speaking, 30% year on year. So it's 30% more power every year in those two things. Now, if fusion scales at that rate, to get to, I don't know, 10% of global demand, where you're actually making an impact, takes many decades, 30 years, something like that. So that sort of negates the imperative which is driving us. So we've got to do things in a different way. And frankly speaking, that requires government intervention. If you leave, those things happened left to the market largely, right? Gas overtook coal because it was cheaper and easier. And fission started to enter into the market because it was dispatchable. So those things are really left to the market. If the only way that you get intervention at a faster scale is for governments to intervene, and the last 2 or 3 years have been quite telling in that. Normally, to develop a new vaccine from scratch, get it licensed, roll it out globally, 10 years if you're lucky.
Right. If you're lucky.
And it happened much quicker than that, because government took all the risk, government primed the supply chain, government unpicked all the regulatory hurdles and worked with the regulators, and you had government, public, private, supply chain, communicators, investors, all working together, all working in Counsel, and because there's global imperative. And only if we treat energy on that same footing will we do anything on the scale and the timescales that are needed.
Right.
Anything short of that, and we won't.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything
But we have to have it ready. I mean, that also stood on the backbone of decades of fundamental innovations in research. I see ourselves almost with the geopolitical situation of the world right now. It's like we were doing this to get ready for this moment. But can we actually deliver? Or we're not as far ahead as they were about being able to deliver this, and like we need to be, right? That's actually why we were having these forums. It's a larger discussion than just the fusion community. So what do we do as a society? Put our shoulders behind these new clean energy sources that we so really, really need.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that the government will have a role throughout this process, and it may translate. It may always be that there's the fundamental R&D questions that the government is solving because there's no private market. And then when we figure out a private market, one thing the private sector might be able to do is scale that approach. I think this came up in a couple of the panels too. Take that approach, scale it, solve the technology at the same time it's solves getting it to market faster, because we need to do that here. And then the government has a role to potentially bring the supply chain together, do all those things that got the vaccines done in a couple of years. Can we do that for fusion in a different way because of the climate imperative?
Yeah, I'll say one other thing about public and private relationships. I speak for our government, I'm sure it's true of most governments. Our government actively want us to work and enable the private sector, right? And I'm pretty sure if you're on the board of a private sector company, you actively want that company to minimize its costs by using what it can from the public sector, of course, right? So both of the controlling minds want the same bloody outcome here. So we've got to make the ecosystem work better.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yep.
All right, so let's move over to some public comments and questions. We'll alternate. We'll start with one from the audience and then go from one virtually. How do I do this? Maybe you in the front, I think you raised your hand first. Yeah, I think you'll need a mic in order to. If one's available, is there a mic? Otherwise the people online can't hear you. Can you up front?
Yeah, on this public-private theme, how do the state-funded, government-backed, university-backed reactors hold on and recruit to good staff, given the mobility of a fusion scientist and engineer who may well be attracted to some fantastic salary in these new startups?
Yeah, so I can answer that.
Yeah.
For sure, look, we have retention problems at the moment. In my view, when we get to a healthy ecosystem, people will go in and out, right? So they'll go into the private sector for a bit, then they might even go into academia, they might come back into the public sector where they get more influence over policy, maybe they get a bit more freedom than they do in the private sector. And so that's a healthy ecosystem where people are moving between the three. Today, that's not where we are, where we're becoming a sort of pipeline of skilled people. And that is part of our role as a national lab, is that we should be a pipeline. As apprentices, as an example, in a few years' time, by 2025, we'll be training 1,000 apprentices a year. I don't need 1,000 apprentices a year. We're doing that to prime the supply chain and prime the industry base. But for sure, we are hemorrhaging people at the moment, and it's not an ecosystem, it's a pipeline. So that has to get better. Yeah. And I think it will as the ecosystem matures.
It depends on what how you set up the partnerships as well too. So this was one of the reasons why half of the founding members of Commonwealth Fusion Systems stayed at MIT, and we actually gave up our stakes in the company as well too, because we knew there was going to be a critical situation with respect to manpower, right, of what was going to go forward with education and training. So we are maintaining evenness because we had just admitted our largest class of graduate students ever into the Plasma Science and Fusion Center. So this is, I think, I agree with Ian, we're going to evolve this to an ecosystem where there is a balance that comes from those. But we've also, because of the excitement of fusion, we've also gained people from other sectors. And so one of the proudest moments in our project was SpaceX, I think, actually blocked our website because we were taking too many employees from them. And it's like, if SpaceX isn't exciting enough for you, like, wow.
That's true. No, I think it's one of those situations where I believe it's important to grow the pie, right? We can't be fighting over a fixed group of people because it's a pretty small community to start off with. Yeah. We need to make that pie bigger, and then everyone will have a role. Let's go to the virtual questions. Maybe this is for you, Dennis, please, or maybe both of you. Please compare STEP to ARC.
Oh boy.
I don't know if this is feasible. Why does the UK choose a spherical tokamak? Is there a major gain? It's easier, but maybe we can focus on just comparing STEP to ARC.
Do you want to go first, or
no? You
I want to pick something that lets you guys.
Right. So on the diversity thing, right? You just said we need to diversify the ecosystem. I completely agree in that, and that's true in terms of penetration as well. If you've only got one thing, your penetration will be limited by how the supply chain scales for that. If you've got multiple different concepts, of course you can penetrate faster. Our view on the spherical tokamak, always the genesis of the spherical tokamak is about driving down scale and driving down price. Now, it has challenges. It also has pros and cons, right? So if you compare STEP and ARC, they're comparable size, comparable scale, different geometries. One has some advantages over the other. The other has advantage. So it's pros and cons either side. I don't know which is the best. We should just explore. I don't think Dennis knows which is the best, right? We should explore parameter space, and we'll see which comes out in the end. But there's not just one type of car, one type of mobile, one type of plane, right? So I think there's a role for all of these things in an energy system.
I mean, our own. I'll go. There isn't even one type of ARC. I mean, at this point. Right. So in fact, what we're doing is. And speaking of how you do innovation, so like the latest group of graduate students at MIT, we're re-exploring the assumptions that we put into ARC to see about whether or not they hold up in terms of an economic competitiveness. And early days, but we're finding we ourselves didn't understand some of the aspects of the optimization around that. So there's going to be a variety of these. When you look at you pull up a whole level. When you look at the energy sector, there's no way there's going to be a single kind of fusion device. Absolutely. Because also realize it's like not just for electricity production, but for all kinds of energy productions, green fuels and so forth. These have a variety of different scalabilities and economics that are almost certainly going to be, at least, even if you pick a particular configuration, you're going to change its size, you're going to change its power output. There's not going to be a single, there's no way this will be a single kind of fusion device in it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Let's take another one from the audience. I think actually you had your hand up first in the back. And then we'll go to you next.
Thank you very much for, whoops.
Oh, and please give your name.
Thank you very much for Nikos Nikiforakis from University of Cambridge. Thank you for the insightful discussion, and thank you for the organizers for a fantastic day. You mentioned predictive capability tools. Do you have a view of what this might look like and what the challenges are when it comes to software development?
So maybe I'll answer the question in a slightly different way. So usually we think of these things in terms of software development, high performance computing, of the prediction of the plasma, because this is sort of the exotic aspect of this. But the reality is that the advent of extremely powerful tools like machine learning and artificial intelligence are going to be tools that we haven't actually tapped into fully yet. And what I mean here, it actually has to go with what Ian had commented to. The integration of these is almost so complex. I've studied fusion for 30 years and I can barely hold it in my head. And this means that the different ways about how you push and pull within these systems, there's not really an answer, there's a range of answers, I think is going to be game-changing. It's already being game-changing in a few certain areas, including, I don't think it's appreciated in our own magnet. This was not just technology development, this was one of the world's most complicated electromagnetic models in computation-wise, because we needed this to be able to predict the performance of the magnet. So I'm not sure if that's the answer that you're looking for, but I am confident that in fact, new ways of looking at computational tools will be central to optimizing fusion on a fast pace.
I would add that on computation, not only are there a lot of potential applications for computation, but we need to move from a world where computation is reserved to supercomputers. But if we want to scale this, we almost need it to become the next ANSYS. We need to bring it down to like the codes and technologies that engineers use on a day-to-day basis so that we can solve this kind of more as an engineering problem and not as a long-term research problem that requires some fancy computer to do. Let's move on. I think you guys have both seen questions 1 and 2. What do you guys think about the breeding blanket question? How about that? That's a classic one, and I think it deserves a little discussion here.
Yeah, look, I think breeding blanket's a big issue. Every fusion device, when it gets to being a power plant, has got to make its own tritium, right? It just has to. So that, somebody was saying to me before, I mean, do you think that's a challenge? And what about if we end up having to prime that a bit? And I said, well, to me, that's the same as electricity. If we have to put electricity in to get electricity out, it's pointless. So it has to produce net electricity, and it has to produce net tritium. Just has to. It's a boundary condition. Yeah. Do we know how to do that? No. Have we ever proven it? No. Do we have any designs that work? No. Do we have a supply chain? No. Do we have a supply chain of enrichment of lithium-6? No. Right? So those are all challenges that we have to overcome. Do we know that it's insoluble? Also no, right? So it's a challenge. We have to come up with clever solutions.
And for those that don't know the full question, I should have said it. DT fusion needs a breeding blanket and neutron-resistant materials. Both are areas of long-term research. What are the plans to achieve progress? And I think you've just hit on it. There's a lot of plans of things we need to do to achieve progress.
Absolutely.
And you know,
so the comment to this though is that let's stop waiting around. This aspect of developing fusion fast means we cannot wait in serial to answer these questions.
Absolutely.
And so, and there are clever ideas. One of the particular ones was about enriching lithium. There are ways that you can make this work without enriching lithium. And again, they're not proven yet in the laboratory, but in fact, the previous panelist, Scott Hsu, was when he was heading up the RPE program, has funded a new project at MIT that basically is going to build essentially a small scale, not ambitious at scale, but ambitious in terms of its science, because we need to get going even at a small scale on these things, because we've just been waiting around for too long of waiting for the perfect answer. There's no perfect answer. Let's get going on small scale and keep innovating. And that's actually what I would like to see more organizations doing. Let's actually do those. Because once you get away from the plasma, many of these problems don't require a fusion power plant to actually do the research. And I think your own program in the UK is really a great example of, in fact, starting to move forward on a wide variety of fronts like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question from the audience. I believe there was a question here before. Yeah. You want to take it?
Hi, Lilia from Shell Ventures again. Sorry, I have many questions today. On government involvement in fusion, so obviously the research has been taking place for decades, and there were a number of approaches pursued, CASPs, MIROs, beam fusion, that were eventually, I guess, abandoned. My understanding is that government interest in fusion and support correlated very often with need and also what happened in energy markets. So my question is this time around, is it more long-term? Is government going to support fusion till it reaches commercial scale? What are your views on that?
Well, there's loads of government officials in the room, so why don't they phone and answer?
Turn it right back on them.
They can put their hand up in a minute. But my view on this is that it's twofold, Lily. I would say that there's imperative, right? And I think the consciousness of the public who vote for government is much higher. So the pull and the demand for clean energy solutions is just higher now than, frankly, it's ever been, right? So there's much more drive and imperative on us. I also think, coupled to that, there have been huge technical breakthroughs. And if they hadn't happened, this drive and imperative would all be driving into other solutions and not fusion. The fact that we have made some real technical breakthroughs means that those two things are aligning a bit. And so my personal view on the UK government's policy on this is that they are in this, they are committed. The fact that they've just announced that they're acquiring a 330-hectare site with big power infrastructure tells you this is a thing that's really happening, and it's something that they are committed to. So yeah, I think this feels very different to the past, personally.
And we should comment to the larger scale one. So this is the one thing that's different now is the advent of a private sector. Yeah. And some of them are, they're not going to work, and some of them are going to do well, and we're going to push that forward. But that actually provides an imperative which is there. And then the international context. Outside of, we tend to focus on the UK and US here, and there's an extremely aggressive program in China for developing fusion energy there as well too. So this is a much larger game than actually what we was previously considered. And in some sense, the question is to you, the public. Like, the government is a reflection of you. I agree with Ian. It's like, what are your imperatives? What are your priorities? And if having clean energy security is an imperative to you, then please, walk with your vote.
One thing I'll add is that I think the advent of a private sector has encouraged the government, at least in the United States, to be more involved and commit long term. I can't speak for any element of the US government, of course, but when we speak to members of the Hill or other members of the administration, by the way, the United States has announced this decadal vision for fusion to put fusion on the grid in a decade. What we hear is that, I didn't know fusion was a thing. I read about ITER. That was kind of cool. I think one of the interns told me about it. But now they're like, there's a company, there's jobs, there's challenges we're going to solve. You're going to hit a couple of my policy milestones. I see a reason to get behind you long term. And I think that advent of an industry means that they're willing to kind of continue as long as the industry is willing to participate.
Yeah,
I'm hopeful about long-term government.
It's interesting too is that you don't know where this will go. In the history of humanity, we have tried really hard things sometime because we feel it's an imperative. And almost always when you do those things and do things that seemed impossible before and we achieve them, then other great things come from them as well too. And we know about these, right? We have these cell phones came from the space program, basically, because they had to develop advanced computing to be able to do that. I think there's examples in this across the board. It's like this is a worthwhile goal to go towards, and it's gonna have other economic fruits that are gonna come to bear on this. Yeah.
Now going back to the virtual audience, the question I think we'll pick this last one here. Is the wide range of fusion devices a help or hindrance when it comes to scalability? This is touching on the scale and diversity questions. I think we've kind of hit on this, but I'd love to just touch on it a bit more.
I'll have a go at that first of all, because I had a sort of road to Damascus moment on that personally, where before I took my current job, I was firmly of the opinion that a number of the startups were a huge deflection of both funding and attention away from the main line and ITER and supporting the development that way. Now that I've taken my current job and got a broader purview about what a successful industry looks like, I've sort of had a Damascus moment and said, well, actually, we should encourage that diversity and we should encourage a multitude of approaches, because, as Dennis said, some of those companies will for sure fail, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. People say, well, that's really damaging to the industry if companies grow and fail. No, I don't care. For sure, those companies will generate some IP which is useful. It might not be as a vendor of a power plant, but they might develop some new niche technology which is for sure useful to the rest of the program. And for sure, they will develop some trained, high-quality people, which are good for the ecosystem. So I'm very supportive of a wide range, and like somebody else said earlier, lots of shots on goal. I think it's the right way to go.
Well, my comment comes from the physics of science, the physics of fusion. So we won't get too technical, but this is, in the end, you've heard about the extraordinary temperatures that is required in fusion, and that's pretty much set. You need around 100 million degrees Celsius. But then you also need another thing, which is that you need to have enough density of the fuel, and you need to basically contain its energy for long enough. But actually, nature doesn't care how you get there. So it can be any combination of that product. And so I can tell you is that the factors in density are about a factor of 10 billion different in the different approaches which are going. 10 billion. And basically, Mother Nature tells you that you can actually achieve fusion conditions at all of the things which are in between there. When it comes to fusion, you are going to have a variety of different choices. When it comes to our own field, you asked about the difference between like step and arc. These are like teeny little differences, actually, compared to just what you would consider in magnetic fusion, let alone all the other steps which are along the way. This is a natural consequence. In fact, in many ways, as a scientist, it's the exciting part of fusion. It tells you there's lots of ways to get there. And the way I look at it is that this will not, in fact, be a hindrance at all to it. although we're going to be competing for talent, I think, to this comment which was given here. And what this is probably going to lead to is that if we can do it in a variety of different ways, these will then themselves find niches in the energy system, because it's more than just decarbonizing electricity, it's decarbonizing everything. And we actually don't know what fusion approaches would actually lend themselves best to these other approaches. So I think it's just a natural consequence of the science of fusion.
Just to touch on the workforce issue, I do think hiring talent into this space has traditionally been one of the biggest challenges with accelerating the private sector in fusion. I know for us, we have 120 employees or 125 employees, and we have 60 open hiring slots, right? And so growing that ecosystem by having such diversity, I think, personally, not speaking for anyone else, I think personally it's going to help grow the interest in fusion and grow that ecosystem, and that's going to be the long-term driver of momentum for success. So scalability there, diversity there is very good. We have time for probably one more question. All right, you. I think you were first. I'll take it.
I like question 2 here, but this is good.
Well, if we get to that, we'll get to that.
Hi, I'm Tim from Goodfellow. What level of collaboration do you think would be beneficial within fusion technology? Or do you think competitive nature between the various fusion programs around the world are driving positive progression?
Yeah, so I think both, actually. I think I come back to COVID, it's a slightly lazy analogy, but it's true. You saw huge collaboration between public, private, lots of different companies, the supply chain, regulators. And I think that for sure allowed us to go quicker. But now, 2 years later, we have lots of different proprietarily owned vaccines, and it's a competitive market. So competitive tension is a good thing, collaboration is a good thing. You need a balance between the two, is my answer.
Yeah, and actually, it's one of the reasons I'm here. We're having discussions actually with you can consider STEP and ARC perhaps, competitive of each other. We actually look at them as complementary to each other.
Yeah.
And there's lots of problems that we have common issues where we can use common resources to get towards those things. To me, the most important thing is that you find if you have alignment, there's going to be, like, what is the market going to be in the end? This is trillions of dollars. There's going to be plenty of glory to go around. We need to help each other get over the hump, actually, originally. I think that's really the most important aspect to this.
Great. We have time just enough to take a question 2 from the virtual audience. I'll just say it real quick. Regarding the more academic aspects of fusion, is the traditional pathway of degree, PhD, postdoc, with a focus on publishing papers, outdated or a hindrance to the industry, or I'll add, actually, or is it positive? Like, what's your thought? Cool. And I'll let Dennis go first.
So this is still required. This is the way Ian and I came into the field. You do need people who've got that deep scientific knowledge and curiosity about driving forward the innovation. But in fact, this itself is a plea to other organizations that are academic institutions like MIT. We are changing our structure around this. That was the only pathway to actually be involved in fusion. And here I really have to give the European and the UK program around apprentices and masters in fusion has been a brilliant example that the rest of the world should really follow. And in fact, at MIT, we are evolving our education system to, in fact, that's not the only pathway. It should be one of the pathways into fusion. But in fact, this is going to be one of the things that opens up the pipeline, in fact, for the talent that we need, not just in the traditional fusion sciences, but in this incredibly broad set of disciplines, particularly the engineering and STEM disciplines, that are going to be required to actually see this all the way through.
Yeah, diversity in approaches, diversity in where people come from, backgrounds, the pipeline into the field, just lots of different approaches.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just do a hiring plug for the private sector companies that need to hire. I think that if you talk about like one of the pathways being into fusion being a plasma physics PhD or something that you would think would be traditional, but if you join one of these small companies that are looking to do fusion, or not so small anymore, one of these fast-growing companies that are doing fusion, you can come in with a bachelor's degree, you can come in with maybe even a technical degree, but the challenges are so numerous and so interesting that we're working to solve across the industry that you can become an expert in something really quickly if you're just willing to dedicate time and effort to it.
But you can still apply to MIT too.
And then, yes, later, and then becomes that pipeline, right? Then they go to MIT and become a professor. So I think with that, I think we've gone over just enough that we'll stop here. Thank you so much for everyone for your time.